filing a notice of intent to seek the death penalty. I do not take this decision lightly, and it is a decision I have made independently as county attorney, based solely on the available evidence and circumstances and nature of the crime.
All right, Jack Posobiec, we're back. Final segment here with Dr. Chloe Carmichael. Dr. Chloe, I know that you've commented on criminal cases before, and look, we're not just speculating on this. I do believe that a lot of this relationship and a lot of the psychology here is going to come up either in the conviction phase of the trial or in the sentencing phase, because we know that the state of Utah is seeking the death penalty. There have been many cases where the death penalty has been taken off because of psychological issues, and it just seems to me that this is certainly going to be one of the big points of contention for the defense team for Tyler Robinson. That so if he is convicted on the basis of the fingerprint evidence, of the DNA evidence tying him to the gun, the statements to the parents, the statements to friends, let's say for sake of argument that he is convicted, do you think this will play a role in the death penalty phase?
Well, I certainly imagine that the defense would attempt to trot that out, but I don't think that they would be successful because the behavior of Tyler Robinson following this event clearly shows that he was completely aware of the difference between right and wrong. He didn't show up, for example, on site and say, "Hey, everybody, I'm going to do everybody a great favor and shoot Charlie Kirk," fully believing that society would celebrate him. That would be a suggestion that he was unaware of the difference of right and wrong. Other reasons why people might use a psychological defect as a way to avoid accountability might be, for example, a very low IQ or lack of intelligence. I don't think that Tyler could plead that either. My understanding is that he was actually very intelligent. What he did have, I would say, is an extreme sense of grandiosity, which is quite common again in young men, which is why it's so tragic that he wasn't I guess, able or willing to just, be around strong men like you, Jack, people like Charlie Kirk, ironically, that could lead him and shape him and sometimes check him and teach him to use his desire to be a man and to stand up for what he believed was right in a more cogent and productive way. So a person can absolutely be mentally ill, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to feed to an insanity plea, because I don't think that there's a lack of competency that his mental illness, if it exists, could be used to suggest.
Right. So what you're and I want to break this down, because I know for a fact almost that this is certainly going to be the way that they try to go for life in prison, or potentially there's been some talk about, not officially, but I've had, a lot of commentators saying, well, what if there's going to be a plea deal to take the death penalty off the case, like we saw in the Brian Koberger case up in Idaho, another situation where it looked like a conviction was going to be likely. Then what you're saying, though, because of his lack of, or I should say no, because of his direct knowledge of what he was doing, because of his understanding of right and wrong, because we, take all of the, the psychology of, okay, why was he involved in this stuff? Why was he looking at this stuff online? He still understood what he was doing. He understood what he was doing, and he made a direct decision to, and by the way, he created this plan. He was hiding the gun under his, his clothing. This was no active passion, is what I'm trying to say. There's a lot of
premeditated.
Extremely premeditated, to the point where, and I suspect that there's going to be information coming out that this wasn't the first time that he had traveled to this campus, a campus that's hours and hours away from where he lived. This was not the same part of Utah where he and Twiggs lived. I think it was a 3-hour drive each time that he visited. So it's something that, and they say when you commit murder, in a premeditated sense, you never commit the murder once, that you commit it over and over and over in your mind before you make that final act. And that's clearly what he did here.
Yeah, in fact, I think some of the text messages, if they're accurate, in fact, he says that he's been planning this, for
That's
about
right.
a week. So it's not as if it were impulsive or an act of passion. It's not as if he lacks intelligence, and it's not as if he doesn't have the capacity to understand right and wrong. So I again, with the Brian Kohlberger case, I think there were some other issues where I think even his confession itself might have been part of a plea deal. But my understanding is that Tyler Robinson, I don't know, has he actually even acknowledged already, that he did this? I'm not sure. Do you know if he
Well, not
has?
I don't believe he has in court. But what we do know is that he's obviously, there's the text messages, there's the Discord chat where he comes into and says, "Hey guys, I just wanted to let you know that was me yesterday." And then
Hmm.
we're also told that when his parents confronted him, he implied to them that it was in fact him. And really his parents figured it out. I mean, they saw the gun. It was a unique, recognizable rifle to them. And then of course the fact that, and this is what I keep coming back to, is even beyond all of the, now of course they'll have to prove in court that, the evidence, the DNA, et cetera, but the fact that it was his parent that made the ID and not law enforcement, I think that makes a very strong case, because what parent is not going to identify their own child?
Yeah, exactly. And my goodness, we haven't even gotten into talking about, say, Lance Twiggs's allegedly what his mother was allegedly doing as well with some of the Venmo payments. Maybe we'll save that for another day. But no, I definitely don't see Tyler Robinson being able to successfully plead, to insanity, because usually I think that type of a plea deal would be offered if the prosecution, needed to get it, or if he actually had a legitimate case to plead insanity as the reason why he would have done this. And I don't see either one of those being plausible here. My hope and prayer is that he has to take full accountability for what he did. I think that would be actually really good for society as well. I think our society is organized better when people have a sense of accountability. So, I love Erica Kirk for forgiving him, but I also don't think that necessarily meant that she, was arguing against the death penalty for him either.
Yeah, and Erica has mentioned this a few times publicly, interviews with Fox News and the New York Times when asked about it, that, I believe the line she used is that I don't want his blood on my hands.
Mm-hmm.
And totally understandable, because as a
Mm-hmm.
Christian, she wants to go to heaven and see Charlie again. And, at the same time, I come from the same perspective as you, where it's about correction for society. And by the way, Charlie himself was in general a supporter of the death penalty on the very same grounds. He points out that the Bible mandates it early on, in even all the way back to the Torah, and that Charlie pointed out that it is the proper corrective for society. And I love the way that he put it, and I tweet this out sometimes, where he said it's not just about punishing the victim or punishing the perpetrator. It's about showing society that the victim's life had value. And that's really what it all is, isn't it? That we learn to value each other as individuals. Even if we disagree, that we can still at least agree that we each do have that value.
Exactly. And there's also an element of deterrence. That's another one of the points,
Of
of
course.
our justice system in the first place. I think that Trump, in this case or another case, called for a swift and public execution. I think that might have been for the
Well, to be
murder
fair,
of
he calls for that in every case.
yeah, yeah, but I do think that there is again a value in that, for the fact of deterrence, and for the fact of ownership of justice, that it shouldn't be something that has to be done in private. I also frankly don't think it should necessarily have to be something that happens with some kind of a painless euthanasia procedure either. I mean, I think that there is value in the
And
element of.
Charlie talked about this, and we did a show together, and people have clipped it up, but he talked about this the exact same way you are. Dr. Chloe Carmichael, where can people go to follow you and get the book?
Thanks, Jack. freespeechtoday.com. That's freespeechtoday.com. I'd love to connect with people there for my book, for my social media, and for little groups about the importance of free speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, as always, you have my permission to lay ashore.